Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone betwixt or beside. A couple of weeks ago, YouTuber and Twitch streamer The Primogen received the following tweet as part of a wider conversation, and I vowed to make a video about it.
Vim is a cancer. I avoid it. It never tried to be user-friendly. Instead, they created their own cult, and they push people away as much as they can, so Vim users can be cool.
Obviously, this tweet is a little bit more inflammatory than necessary, but it's a reasonable thought. The guy says that the developers of Vim never tried to be user-friendly, and I think that kind of implies that it's laziness or just poor software development. In fact, I think it was 100% a conscious design decision, and in this video, I'd like to explain why. Fundamentally, user interfaces can be placed on a spectrum of sorts, where at one end you have what I'm going to call discoverability, and at the other end you have expressiveness. Discoverability is how easy it is for a user to discover the features of your software or product or item or whatever, and expressiveness is how easily the user can do what they want, how easy they can express themselves, express their intent using that interface. So, to illustrate, we could look at a light switch. A light switch is very discoverable. It's perhaps the most discoverable thing that you could imagine. There's only one thing you can do, and you just press it, right? It would become very apparent very quickly how to use this, even if you'd never seen a light switch before. You could play with it and understand that it has two states, and you can press it one way or the other to change the state. However, it's not particularly expressive. We can't dim the light, we can't change its color, we can't do anything like that. It's just on or off. But we could switch to a dimmer switch, which now can be pressed in to turn it on and off, or it can be rotated to dim the light. We've gained expressiveness, but arguably discoverability has fallen a tiny bit. Right? It's a little bit harder to figure out than just mashing your meat fists on the switch, right? Okay, so we can probably surmise as a general rule that as expressiveness goes up, discoverability goes down, and usually vice versa. But why does this have to be the case? Why can't we have both a discoverable and expressive interface? Well, you kind of can, but your control surface, that is to say the size of the interface between your product and your user, is usually limited, right? Either that's screen space or the size of the product or whatever. So if you try and make the ultimate discoverable yet expressive interface, then you end up with something that looks a little bit like this. Or maybe like this. So the point is you can't just whack everything on the screen that you can do, because that just leads to a poor user interface, right? It becomes less usable. Despite being very discoverable and very expressive, it's not very usable. So we can kind of apply this logic to text editors, right? Something like VS Code or Sublime are very discoverable. They have lots of menus that help you get acquainted with the interface. If you want to know how to enable the spell checker, you can just look through the menus. If you need a particular function, you can just search the command palette and the fuzzy search will probably find something for you. The author of the tweet from earlier would probably call this user-friendly. It tries to help the user get up to speed quickly. But back to our discoverability expressiveness dichotomy from earlier, they are less expressive than Vim. If you want to go to the third instance of the letter F in the next paragraph, there's no menu item in VS Code for that. And it's not really about functionality, it's about the interface between my brain and the text editor, right? It's a UI design decision rather than a functionality issue. Okay, but the author of the tweet might still argue that discoverability is important. It's a major goal of UI design for a user to be able to quickly understand your product. And he'd be right, but there is another facet to that dichotomy that I think kind of changes the whole thing. Because as your expertise with a particular interface increases, the importance of discoverability plummets, right? If you've used Vim or indeed VS Code or anything for many years, it's simply not important how discoverable the interface is, but it's hugely important how expressive it is. This is why it's valuable to use tools like Vim, sed, or the Git command line over a GUI. There is an upfront cost in learning how they work, But once you do so, you are able to express yourself with your tools much more than you would otherwise be able to. Does that mean that everyone should use Vim? No. If it's a tool that you have no interest in developing a mastery of, then there's no point. You're just shooting yourself in the foot by putting up with an obtuse experience for no later payoff. For instance, I don't use LaTeX for formatting documents. I know a lot of people in the Linux community do. And I have no doubt that it's incredibly flexible and valuable, and I love watching videos on it. But I just don't do a lot of writing where the intricacies of typesetting are that important. And if I ever do need to do something slightly outside of my comfort zone, I'm glad that I can just scan some menus on a word processor to try and figure it out on the one occasion where it's valuable, right? So if you're someone who spends a significant portion of their day manipulating pure text, like code for instance, then I highly recommend that you do a bit of exploration about Vim and decide if it's worth the investment. And it's worth considering also if you're being fooled by a particular tool's ease of use, right? Just because you're able to get started quickly doesn't necessarily mean that that will serve you in the long term. Thank you for joining me, guys. This video was sponsored by me and my newsletter Brisk. Brisk is a newsletter about digital productivity from the perspective of a busy developer/entrepreneur. It's free to subscribe at www.bebrisk.email. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.